BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast. Today we hear what it means for farmers if the UK bioethanol industry closes down.
If we have the same amount of supply but less demand, it means that we've got more grain hanging around, which has the potential to suppress markets.
We'll have more on that in a moment. First to France, where nearly 2 million people have signed a petition to demand an end to the use of a chemical called acetamiprid. It's a neonicotinoid chemical which was previously banned for use in France but allowed in other EU states. France has now lifted its ban, which has angered conservationists. The chemical is allowed for use in the UK. BBC Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield has been following the controversy in France.
The petition came because a law was passed in July by the government, and this law was a response to pressure from farmers. At the end of last year, there was a big movement by farmers with street protests and, tractors on motorways and so on, particularly about legislation, about regulation, about getting government off our backs, the EU off our backs, letting us produce kind of thing. And the government felt the pressure and said we must do something about this, and introduced this law which covers a lot of different areas, but the bit that's really touched the nerves is this rolling back of the legislation on one particular neonicotinoid, this acetamiprid, as they call it here, which is used in the treatment of sugar beet. So this law rolled back that ban in order to please the farmers. That then prompted outrage from the left, from ecologists, who converged on this petition launched by an obscure student of environmental science who went on the National Assembly website, and you can do this now, and sort of said, sign up here, we need signatures to block this legislation. And she's got 2 million now, more than 2 million. And that is seen as a huge success and a sign that, there is this sort of groundswell of opinion against the law, and there's pressure on the government to do something about it. And you've got a classic ecology farming split, which in the very sort of febrile atmosphere of France at the moment is raw and could lead to trouble.
And there is that disappointment by the farmers who are saying that the French government is taking a different stance from the rest of Europe.
Well, that's exactly it. And that's really like for them rubbing salt in the wound. There's a lot of imports coming to France. I mean, France should be the great big producer and exporter of food. That's the image it has. But now it's importing more and more of its food. 50% of its chicken, 60% of its fruit and veg, I think, coming from other countries in Europe. And many of these countries don't have the same rules, particularly on this particular neonicotinoid. So they're saying this is absolutely ridiculous. All this stuff is being imported from other countries, which was produced using this treatment. So the idea that, it's better for the planet is rubbish. More broadly, they're constantly pushing for this idea of mirror clauses. You only import into France food from countries which have the same rules and regulations as France does. That way you have a level playing field. And that what they're saying is, in Europe, it's not even a level playing field.
Because the petition was signed by so many people, does it mean that the government has to take action in some way?
It certainly doesn't have to overturn the law. The law has not yet been promulgated. It has to be cleared by the Constitutional Council, which rules on all laws and whether or not they conform with the French Constitution. There is in the Constitution now a clause that says that citizens have to live in a clean, environmentally safe environment. And potentially, on the back of this big petition, the Constitutional Council could feel pressurised to interpret this clause about a safe environment very broadly and say, well, actually, we think this law is therefore unconstitutional. But this all remains to be seen.
BBC Paris correspondent Hugh Schofield. This week we're looking into how we manage supplies of fresh water in drought and flood for farming, conservation and leisure. Today we're on the edge of the Broads National Park, a unique water-based environment where ditches replace hedges and where the land has been managed by people for thousands of years. The waterways on the Broads are managed by the Internal Drainage Board, or IDB. It's made up of landowners and householders who pay an annual drainage levy, which funds 30 36 pumping stations that control 750 kilometres of ditches and waterways. The IDB has a statutory duty to keep the ditches free-flowing. I've been to meet farmers Nick Dean and Lewis Bohr, who are both on the Broads Drainage Board. Lewis explained how the system works.
So where we are is outside a Broads Internal Drainage Board pumping station, sitting alongside How Hill National Nature Reserve. As we stand here, we've got the habitat of the nature reserve, grazing marsh to one side, and then behind us we've got agricultural arable land. So we have highly productive agricultural crops in the driest part of the country that require irrigation, sitting alongside the most biodiverse national park, Britain's largest wetland.
We're at a pumping station. Just tell me how this works.
They're automated and they have a summer level and a winter level. And if you look now, on one side you can see the river level, which is much higher.
We're just going to walk. We have to be careful, don't we? We don't fall in.
Deep water, don't go any closer. What we're looking at now is the corner of the nature reserve, and this is at river level. And then we've got the pumping station with two discharge outlets here. Behind it, you've got the drainage board level, the summer level, which is about 5-6 feet lower.
We're just going to walk round this down to the other side. Well, this is much lower.
The dikes or ditches serve several functions. A lot of the biodiversity in the Broads is not just in the Broads, but it'll be in these waterways. They also act as a source of drinking water for summer grazing cattle. Actually, they're what we call wet hedges. The water keeps the cattle in where they should be.
Let's bring in Nick.
Yes, I'm Nicholas Dean. I'm a local farmer. To me, abstraction irrigation is really important. The key thing for farmers is security of reliable water supplies.
We've just built and commissioned a winter storage reservoir, which was used for the first time this year.
You farmers then have banded together not only to save water when you need it, but to do the actual monitoring to show the authorities why you need the water.
We've got a live project that's grant-aided by the DEFRA Farming in Protected Landscape scheme.
The word used is smart farming. We try a much more sophisticated way of using our water and also of showing when we can abstract it from the various sources, how much we can put on, how effective it is, and therefore minimising any risk to the environment.
Andrea Kelly is Environment Policy Advisor with the Broads Authority. She told me the floodplain of the Broads is the perfect environment for a step change in the way farmers and conservationists can work together to manage water better for both.
These are the places that are naturally ready to hold water and create benefits for nature, to hold the carbon in the soil so the carbon isn't broken down by bacteria when it heats up in the summer, which is going to get hotter, and of course to hold those winter floods. We need those floodplains to function in places back as they were designed to.
Andrea Kelly. And re-wetting peat in the Broads is the next challenge, something that all government agencies and farmers will have to work on together.
We're now having to provide water for climate change mitigation in the management of lowland peat in the Broads. So the demand for water for the environment is going to increase at the same time as our demand for water with more hotter summers is also going to increase. So it's vital we get that balance to give the protection to the environment, which we understand because we live and work here. It is a special place.
Internal Drainage Board member and farmer Lewis Bohr. The bioethanol company Vivergo, which is based near Hull, says it'll take in its last consignment of grain tomorrow before it closes, after the US-UK trade deal which came into force last month. The deal allows imports of bioethanol from America of up to 1.4 billion litres tax-free, the equivalent of the total annual UK bioethanol production. Bioethanol is produced using surplus grain and other crops and is added into forecourt fuels as a green energy alternative to fossil fuels. Millie Askew is lead analyst for cereals and oilseeds from the AHDB, the levy board which represents producers in the food chain.
So there are two major bioethanol plants in the UK, and they can predominantly use UK-grown feed wheat. They can also use imported feed wheat as well as imported grain maize. They combined have the capacity to use around 2 million tonnes of grain. And I would just like to highlight there the word capacity. They have the capacity to do that. But we know that neither plant have been running at full capacity for some time now, and that's due to compressed margins. While we don't have the exact usage information, because it's quite commercially sensitive due to the fact there are only two large plants in the country, we know that the margins of bioethanol have been very much squeezed of late, and both plants haven't been operating at what we would class as full capacity for a while. Before the US sort of UK trade deal, US bioethanol has been dominating the UK market for some time due to its relative price, and around 2/3 of the UK bioethanol market currently, or pre the trade deal, was taken up with US bioethanol anyway.
So what would be the impact then if both of the plants closed in the UK?
When the plants are running at, I say, near full capacity or running at higher capacity, we tend to see that there is somewhat of an elevated premium in the northeast and in the Humberside area for feed wheat, from the demand point of view, obviously going into those plants. But in essence, if overnight we lost both UK bioethanol plants, we would see a loss of a demand centre or two demand centres, which would lead to surplus of product. So we don't have that demand anymore. We would then see higher stock. So we would, in theory, again, in a typical production year, we would end up with higher closing stocks or carry-out stocks into the next year, or a higher exportable surplus.
Should the UK be thinking about UK security of bioethanol production domestically?
So I think that's an interesting question. I think if we go down, obviously, other avenues, we've got E5 and E10, haven't we, in terms of petrol and diesel inclusions there. But I think going onto another avenue, that obviously there's been a bit of talk and murmurings about sustainable aviation fuel as well. Now, currently, the rules around sustainable aviation fuel, that it has to be made from sort of recycled vegetable oils, as an example, not edible crops. But if, for example, said rules were changed, there would be the opportunity to use, for example, bioethanol in sustainable aviation fuel. But then it gets into the debate around food versus fuel as well, around what land is being used for.
I mean, you talk to farmers, don't you? Are they worried about this? Does it concern them that they might not have somewhere to send their grain to make bioethanol, or do they just find other markets?
Well, I think as the industry as a whole, it is always a concern if there is a loss of a demand centre. So it's also to do with supply and demand balance. If we have the same amount of supply but less demand, it then weighs on a heavier sort of UK overall balance sheet as such. And it means that we've got more grain hanging around, which has the potential to suppress markets and suppress prices. However, like I say, that's very much has the potential to, because what happens in the UK market, given that the UK accounts for less than 1% of total global production of, say, wheat, we are very much influenced of what's going on globally, especially in the US and even in wider Europe, and what's going on everywhere else. So what influences prices globally influences prices over here. But a loss of a demand centre does have somewhat of a negative impact on the supply and demand balance.
Millie Askew from the AHDB. In relation to the bioethanol company Vivergo, the Department for Business and Trade told us, we entered into formal discussions with the company on potential financial support last month. We will continue to take proactive steps to address the long-standing challenges the company faces and remain committed to working closely with them throughout this period to present a plan for a way forward that protects supply chains, jobs and livelihoods. That's all from us for now. I'm Anna Hill. The producer is Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.